Podcast incoming. Star Wars Season, Episode 1.
Hello, everybody. How are you? I'm just talking talk. I really have.
The Death of the Old.
Hello, and welcome back to 50 Years of Shit Robots with Matt Brown, hello, and Stephen Murray.
Well, hello.
And very excited. We've had a little bit of a hiatus while we rated our bots, but we have now reached the season to end all seasons. In our journey of the 50 years between 1927 and 1977, looking at all the robots in films in those years, we have reached Star Wars in 1977. We've decided that Star Wars is so important and massive a topic that we're going to have to do a whole season on it. And like most of the films that we've watched since 1968, I feel like this season is very much influenced by Stanley Kubrick's 2001.
Yes, all of science fiction is.
But that was when we did multiple episodes on one film. Us now watching Star Wars are being influenced by when we watched 2001.
Are we stuck in an influence loop?
Yeah, we've just been so meta that we have been influenced by ourselves watching 2001. So we are going to be doing Star Wars this season. However, in true 50 Years of Shit Robots fashion, we're not going to start with Star Wars because that would be far too easy. We're going to sort of luxuriate a bit in a bit of backstory, I suppose, like what was going on in cinema in the lead up to 1977. We'll do a biographical episode of George Lucas. Hey, I'm George Lucas.
Hey!
I'm getting my voice ready for that. But we're going to start off with something of a sideways look at sci-fi in the mid-1970s. And we're going to be looking at it with a special guest, someone who's already been on this podcast 3 times. We welcome animator, author, and sci-fi nerd. It's Neil Moonbase Alpha Bushnell. Hello, Neil.
Hello.
Welcome back.
Thanks for having me back.
So, season 10 is our season about Star Wars. We're going to start off by looking not at Star Wars, but at something else, which is the TV show that ran from 1975 to 1977, Space 1999. Looking at this TV show, kind of like it was a happy coincidence, because Neil, you'd said to us, oh, you should look at Space 1999 because there's a robot in that. And then, Stephen, you said, when we were thinking about our Star Wars season, you said, oh, we should start off with Space 1999. And why did you say that?
Along with Logan's Run, it's kind of these two things, one cinematic and one on TV, at the end of the white, clinical, everything works science fiction films, which was kind of started with 2001: A Space Odyssey. And they had a great run of having these very clinical science fiction, lots of science, not very much fiction. They should have peeked over the studio wall when they were making Space 99 and got some tips from what was going on in one of the next studios. White and clean and nice was over, and used future was in.
So this sort of represents the end of one vision of the future.
Yeah.
And we're about to embark in Star Wars on a new vision of the future.
Completely, radically overhauls everything in movie sci-fi.
But I mean, if they had looked over the wall, they would have just laughed at Star Wars, wouldn't they? I'd have imagined.
Probably. There was a lot of doubt around that film, a lot of doubt indeed.
Yeah, yeah. And this, as you say, this really does feed off from 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yeah, the DNA is all there.
Well, there are actual, like, shot-for-shot moments, aren't there?
Yeah.
So what we're going to do in this episode of the podcast, we're going to take a look at primarily an episode from season 2. Neil, what was the episode that you've chosen for us to look at there?
So the episode is called Brian the Brain, and it's the only episode of Space 1999 that has a bona fide robot
Yeah.
that has a body and a brain and kind of has a physical presence. There is the main mission computer in season 1, which talks and kind of interacts, and there are a few other examples of things like that as well. But yeah, this is a fun episode. It's not the best episode by any means of Space
Brian the Brain.
1999. Yeah, Brian the Brain. Season 2 is generally regarded as the less good season, but it's got a lot to enjoy, I think.
Okay. But you said when you sent me the email saying we should look at Brian the Brain, and then you put a little coda in, and you said,
What did I say?
You said we should look at Brian the Brain. It's not the best episode, but it's the only one with a proper robot, which is what you just said. And then you said you should probably also watch the first episode, Breakaway, so you can get a sense of how awesome the series was.
Yes.
So you are like a big fan of Space 1999.
Yeah, I mean, it was on at the right time when I was a child. I think I probably saw it when I was 5 or 6 when it was broadcast. The broadcast of it on TV was really choppy. It was depending on which part of the country you were in when it was on. Certainly, I have kind of vivid memories of watching it as a child, and what I really loved about it was that sense of the world, the moon base, and it naively felt like it was possible at the time, growing up in that sort of Apollo era and being a child, that kind of felt like that was the logical next step was, we'll all go and live on the moon in the next 20 years. Why not?
Yeah.
As you say, it kind of led into that sort of Star Wars obsession as well. So it ticked all the right boxes.
Stephen, did you watch it at the time as well?
Oh, God, yeah. It was a big event, huge event.
Yeah.
And it premiered on a Friday night as well, prime time. And it was like just huge. And the first episode, I was absolutely blown away. And then as each episode went along, I realized that this
slightly less blown away.
It kind of took the philosophy-ish from Star Trek, but made it immense. And at the time, if I was into kind of all the cosmic stuff from H.P. Lovecraft, and it's kind of very gothic. It was epic, and just the look of it. The Eagle transporter has become unbelievably iconic. It's so well beloved. That's the spaceship that they use and reuse. Yeah. It's got a huge following still. I think they're reissuing them, aren't they?
Yeah, there's a real following for Space 1999, even though it's 50 years old now.
And we wouldn't have the Millennium Falcon without the Eagle.
That's very true. So the original design of the Millennium Falcon was, the Rebel blockade runner at the very beginning of the Star Wars that's being chased by the Star Destroyer.
Yes.
Which is kind of a long, more of a sausage-shaped ship with lots of engines at the back. That was originally going to be the design of the Millennium Falcon, but on a kind of a reduced scale. So there was a smaller Falcon-style cockpit at the front, but the rest of the ship was pretty much the same. And George Lucas saw it and thought it looked too much like the Eagle. So they changed that. And that's why they redesigned the Millennium Falcon to be much more the hamburger style.
Which is exactly how he described it, how he wanted it.
There's something about the fact that it's Space 1999 Eagle and Millennium Falcon, that the naming of it is one meant to be kind of a reference to the other.
Ah, that's nice, if it's true.
Yeah,
but Lucas visited the studio when they were making Space 1999 because he wanted to get some of the crew to work on Star Wars.
Right.
But I think a couple of them had already committed to working on the Bond films as well. One of them did work on Alien, didn't he, Brian Johnson?
That's right. Won an Oscar for it.
He did.
So Space 1999, if you've never seen Space 1999, then, I mean, pretty much it is the story of there's a base on the moon, which is called Moonbase Alpha. And this is a repository for nuclear waste.
Well, part of it is.
Part of it is. And that repository explodes with such force that the moon is ripped out of Earth's orbit and then goes like a minstrel, goes wandering through space, but with the moon base still on. And so the planet sort of becomes a spaceship. Reminiscent, I thought, of the storyline of Invasion Earth 2150. Don't the Daleks want to turn the Earth into a spaceship in that?
That's right. Yeah, they do. They do. They want to hollow it out and turn it into a giant spaceship for reasons. Yeah.
Yes.
But yeah, the moon does become a slightly unlikely giant spaceship. Yeah. So the nuclear dump is on the other side of the moon, and Moonbase Alpha is kind of facing the Earth. I suppose there was a lot of this in the air at the time about what we're going to do with all of this rubbish that we're making, all of this nuclear waste, and where we're going to put it. So I guess there was an element of that.
It's also a jump-off point for a mission to visit another planet, isn't it?
Yes.
Meta.
That's part of the plot, isn't it?
Yes.
Part of what I would say is the ludicrous amount of time that we spend on this first episode. Because the plot of the first episode is, there's this, the moon is a base where they want to send a probe to this planet. It's planet Meta, is it?
Yes.
And which is potentially has life on, or could sustain life. And however, lots of people on Moonbase Alpha have been dying or have been like seriously injured for some unknown reason. And so John Koenig, aka Martin Landau, is sent up there to investigate. That's great. I love that there's a line from, what's the character who is Barbara Bain's character?
Barbara Bain.
Carter, the doctor.
Carter.
Helena,
So Carter has got this theory, all these theories, and she's basically like gaslit by all the blokes, isn't she? Who sort of say, "We don't think there's much in her. She's good in some areas of space science, but not in others." And she says to Martin Landau after he performs some extraordinary move in an eagle, she says, "We need answers. We don't need heroes." And I thought to myself, she might not want a hero, but by God, she's got one. Because Martin Landau goes up and basically sorts everything out, but it's slightly too late because what has been, it's all connected to this nuclear waste, and before they can properly sort out the problem that's been killing everybody, it all explodes and the moon shoots off.
And now, I've got a name wrong as well. Sorry, it's Helena Russell.
Helena Russell.
I'm getting her mixed up with Alan Carter, who is the Eagle pilot. An easy mistake to make.
Very easy mistake.
Not for me. He's very easy on the eye.
Is he the Australian?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great.
There's a bit of a crush I did on when I was
in season 2, the title sequence explains the entire plot of episode 1 in 8 words. It's amazing. It just says Moonbase Alpha, massive explosion. moon flies off into space or something like that. You think, why couldn't they have just done that? And this reminded me, we've recently watched the Questor tapes, that's a Jerry Anderson thing, wasn't it, Steve?
No, Gene Roddenberry.
Oh, Gene Roddenberry, yeah, that's right. And in the Questor tapes, our conclusion really was that they turned what should be a title sequence into an entire film. And I sort of feel with Breakaway that would be my one criticism of it, I suppose. Well, my one of many criticisms. But I mean, what I was going to ask was, does any of the stuff that happens in that first episode play out at all in terms of plot, or once they're sort of hurtling through space, are they now just like encountering aliens, visiting other worlds, all of that sort of stuff?
Pretty much every episode is either the moon encounters a planet or a civilization, or a spaceship arrives at the moon base. So it's kind of it does become kind of Alien of the Week after that.
Yeah. I mean, I'd say that in the first episode, I mean, there are things there's loads to love about it, I'd say. I mean, I know I've been slagging off a bit, as is my my mission on this podcast. But for example, I think the special effects look great.
Yeah.
It was really expensive at the time. I think it was the most expensive show at the time.
Right.
2.8 million.
per episode or for the season?
No, for the season 1.
For season 1, yeah.
And then madly, 4.3, I think, for season 2.
Right.
Wow.
I know.
Doesn't show so much, does it?
Not really.
The like for example, in the first episode, there's lots of shots of astronauts working on the moon. And I love the way they did that. The gravitational difference of the moon and how you slow, your movement slows down. And I just thought that was lovely. And which is actually, one of my favourite bits in the Brian the Brain episode in season 2 is where Martin Landau is sort of again in that environment. And the way they do it, I thought was lovely. Really nice.
Yeah, there's a lot of that kind of. I think especially in the first few episodes of the first season that they really try and make it look as authentic as it can be with kind of such an extreme scenario. And they do a lot in those first episodes to set the world up. The travel tubes, the launch pads. And how we get to move around, and the sets are fantastic, and just the feeling that you of believability in this slightly unbelievable world is really strong.
There is such a look of 2001 about it.
Absolutely.
Like in those when they're on the surface of the moon, and they've got just those very high, bright lights, which are obviously like lighting up the work area. I mean, that's also almost identical to when you see the monolith on the moon in 2001.
And even that the moon bus in 2001 is almost, you can sort of see a connective tissue to the design of the Eagle. You could almost imagine that it was the same place and they just kind of kept on developing things.
There's the shot of the sort of air stewardess bringing Martin Landau a cup of coffee, and then him receiving a video call, and it's almost identical. So I half expected the air stewardess to sort of pick up a pen that was rotating in the air.
Yeah.
I mean, that's lovely. That's been one of the lovely things I think about our journey is being able to see the way that science fiction sort of evolved, or mainstream science fiction certainly evolved out of like 2001. The series was conceived by Sherry and Sylvia Anderson, and it was the final production of their partnership, it says. Is that due to death or divorce, or
a bit of divorce, I think, at the time?
They just had enough of each other.
It did separate between the two series, or around about that time. I forget exactly when, but certainly things weren't good.
Okay. And the two sort of big stars are Martin Landau and Barbara Bain, who were real life husband and wife at the time.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know
that's
that.
one of the reasons that they wanted to cast them, I think.
Weren't they fresh from Mission Impossible?
That's right. And they were quite big stars at the time, so I think they
huge.
demanded quite a bit of money from what I've read. So they were a big draw.
Because this was made by ITV in the UK. This is a UK production. Lou Grade sort of oversaw it for ITV.
American-Italian co-production.
Right. And again, in the second season, I've heard that the way it's structured is to accommodate American ad breaks. So I don't know if that is, again, part of the reason why it feels a bit weird, the second season, maybe.
Well, the second season, they brought in a new producer called Fred Freiberger, who was the producer on the last season of Star Trek, the original series, which people generally dislike or like less, should I say, of the three seasons. And so he brought a bit more of that sort of slightly wacky Star Trek-y later episode vibe to the second season. So I think there's that going on. So there's a different producer and less influence, I guess, from Sylvia in the second season.
And Maya.
Yes.
So Maya is an animorph?
Metamorph.
In that she can change into any number of... Is it just anything, or is it only Earth animals?
I think it's anything that's organic.
It is kind of it's anything the writers need her to turn into.
Because I was going to say that that her ability to turn into earth animals is probably not brilliant if she's encountering, extraterrestrial
Yes.
activity. But
No,
then if she can,
yeah, she's turned into alien creatures before
Fine.
as well, and kind of gone berserk and out of control.
but she's a season 2 character.
Yes,
Yeah.
she came along in the first episode of season 2 with Brian Blessed as her father, and Tony as well as a new character for this
Howard's
season.
Way.
Yeah.
Thought that was brilliant. Well, as we're talking about season 2, should we talk about Brian the Brain? It was written by Jack Ronda, and the director was Kevin Connor, and the shooting script is dated 5th of May 1976. So again, we're still pre-Star Wars, I suppose, here, aren't we?
Oh yeah, very much so.
There's some wonderful light-hearted banter at the beginning of the episode.
What's the matter, John? Don't you like having an easy time?
Oh, I'd like it much better if my off-duty time coincided with yours. And it hasn't, not once. Not once since we started this memory rewind.
Well, maybe the computer will pick out some memories of us together. Then we can learn from the past.
I'd rather get back to the present.
Martin Landau and Barbara Bain. I mean, are they an item at this point?
Well, yes, I think so. It's never said on screen, but there's certainly the body language says enough. I think.
So there's some lovely banter at the beginning, and they're running some tests, and then all of a sudden they discover that they are veering massively off course, and the only explanation that they can see is that there's a sort of a planet, a distant planet. But before they can do anything, then suddenly they see a spacecraft hurtling towards them. A Swift, it's called, and this is a spaceship that is from Earth but predates the Eagle. So obviously, Space 1999, the moon base Alpha mission, is set in 1999 in the distant future of 1999. But the Swift comes from 1996, and we discover that all of the members of the team have encountered a planet and then died. The only sort of member of the team that still remains is a wisecracking robot who ends up being called Brian.
Hello, everybody. How are you? I'm fine. I'm just honky-tonk. I really am.
This robot is voiced by Bernard Cribbins, which sort of makes you, Neil, our Bernard Cribbins correspondent, doesn't it?
I just realised that this morning. Yeah, I thought, hang about. I've got a bit of a Bernard Cribbins fixation going on here.
Yeah,
but there's worse things to be fixated on.
Well, quite. So he's the voice of Brian, and also appears in the episode as the commander of the ill-fated Swift mission.
And he's the creator of Brian as well.
That's right, Captain Michael. That's right. He was the boss of the mission, and also he created Brian. And so Brian refers to him as father. So Brian appears like the crew of the Eagle. They ruddy love him, don't they? To start with,
yeah.
They love his little jokes, and he tries to chat up a trolley.
he's quite flirty, isn't he?
He's all jokes and making everyone laugh, and they all fall in love with him. And then he sort of says, "Oh, can I just talk to your computer on board the moon base?" Then he kidnaps Martin Landau and Barbara Bain.
He wants to take them back to the planet to get the fuel supply.
Yeah,
that's on the planet so that he can live forever.
He could have been anybody, could it?
I think it could have been anybody,
Yeah.
But again, for plot purposes, he picked the main characters.
Yeah.
So, yeah, he disappears with them and leaves everyone slightly bemused and confused.
Brian kidnaps them and takes them to this planet, but after subjecting them to what he calls a love test, because he asks them if they're an item and they say no. Which is why? Because they don't trust him, or do you think? Or
I'm not really sure. Yeah, because he's asked, "Do you love each other?" And they're like, "No," and it's all very kind of school playground, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then so he decides, right, I'm going to shove you both in an airlock,
in separate airlocks,
suffocate them,
and I'm going to suffocate until you admit it.
That's
well,
right.
I'd admit I loved Martin Landau if you put me in an airlock.
Yeah, and took away all my air. Yeah. It felt like it was a very flawed experiment.
Yes.
And probably wouldn't stand up to peer review.
No, I don't. I think Asimov would have something to say about this.
But it does provide both Barbara Bain and Martin Landau the opportunity to do some absolutely extraordinary acting.
It's very 70s acting, isn't it?
Oh my God, where they're both behind glass. You can't hear them, but they're acting like they haven't brought enough air. I mean, it's worth the admission price alone for that, I thought.
Absolutely. And then there's a very awkward kind of embrace when they get out, when they finally do get released from the airlock, and lots of gasping and choking. Yeah, it's great.
And then Brian's all sort of like, "Ooh, I knew you were in love."
I just wonder what if Bernard Cribbins actually did ask, "What is my motivation?"
Yeah.
Well, he was on set when he was playing out his lines as well, and it does. There is a sense of him kind of enjoying it and ad-libbing quite a bit.
I thought he was great.
Yeah. But he gave it a lot of personality. He gave it a lot of life. Yes. Really, he brought that rather crappy robot to life, didn't he?
He did. He was really going for it, wasn't he?
Yeah.
I think maybe he could have been reined in a He really just absolutely went for it.
When you think of psychotic robots, you've got Hal at one end and you've got Bernard Cribbins at the other, haven't you?
Yeah. It was excellent. Because he is
parallel.
Yeah. Because he is an absolute psychopath, isn't he?
Yes.
And we find out that he's responsible for the deaths of the crew and also responsible for the death of Bernard Cribbins, weirdly.
I think I'd like to say he's a sociopath and not a psychopath.
Not a psychopath, okay, fair enough.
He's definitely a sociopath. All the things he does is definitely sociopathic.
He's definitely a path of some kind.
He's a path, yes.
Come on, get on with it. Dr. Russell, open the hatch there, number 4.
Incidentally, I saw your crew scattered all over the planet's surface, lying dead.
So they're dead?
And Captain Michael, sitting at his command desk, also dead.
My father? Come on, get on with that fuel!
Martin's plan is to confront Brian with the awful truth of what he is and what he's done, and which they all do, and they all again in a schoolyard, they're circling him, poking him and chanting him and stuff. And eventually they manage to force him into an airlock and sort of flush him out of the spaceship, but trap him by his plug, his plug lead.
Well, that's where they got the idea from for the end of Alien. I'm sorry.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. And so he's hanging out of the back of the spaceship, pleading for his life, because he's got Moonbase Alpha's sort of computer program uploaded into. He sort of uploaded it into himself. They get that back so they can sort out Moonbase Alpha, and then they decide they're going to give him another chance. And reprogram him. And it's at this point when they're sort of talking about how they can give him a sense of morality. Martin Landau pipes up with, we can give him the 10 Commandments.
Yeah, because that was good for mankind, wasn't it?
It's like you don't want an Old Testament Brian the Brain wandering around.
Yeah, that end sequence is a little bit vague and what are they going to? They're going to reprogram him with some morality and just let him free again, or
float around.
Yeah, it's not quite clear.
Become a cult.
Yeah. Luckily, he doesn't turn up again. He doesn't become a recurring character or anything like that. So he's only in the one. But there is that slightly nervous moment at the end where you're thinking, "Hang on, what's going to happen next?"
I thought the design of Brian reminded me a bit of something we've talked about quite recently, Stephen. The designer for Robbie the Robot and B9.
Robert Kaneshita.
Robert Kaneshita, was a washing machine designer, wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
And Robbie, for me, looks like one of those massive industrial sort of dryer, the top-loading dryers.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
He's an enormous square box, isn't he?
He's a big old unit. Yeah, it reminded me of Box from Logan's Run as well. I
Yeah.
just felt
Okay.
like he was a kind of a small love child of Box.
Yeah.
Overwhelming, am I not?
In terms of like mirroring it to Star Wars, I know that Star Wars obviously had a much bigger budget
Mm.
than this TV series, but the robots that George Lucas sort of designed and Macquarie designed for Star Wars are light years away from Brian, aren't they?
They kind of are and they kind of not.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
suppose
I was
so.
going to say that. Yeah,
Well,
because
at least
I
they.
could imagine him. I could imagine Brian at the end of that lineup of, the Jawas are selling the droids. I can imagine him at the far end. It's like
No,
put the rubbish robot at the end.
no, it
Nobody will ever
won't.
notice him.
He doesn't. I mean, all of those robots have some sort of functionality, don't they?
In Star
And
Wars,
in
yeah.
in Star Wars, sorry, yeah. Even those, even though they're all beat up, so there's like mangled up, beaten up droids that
Yeah,
explode.
yeah.
Brian would still look really out of place.
You're probably right. You're probably right. He's not. He's not the best design ever, is he?
No, and maybe it's just the curvature of something like R2D2,
That's
which
true.
just looks more aesthetically pleasing than a cardboard box.
I think you might have hit on something when you said that they all look as if they could function somewhere.
Mm.
All the robots in there, even the ones that look like Huey, Dewey, and Louie, and ones that are just all look like mad Swiss Army knives with all the blades deployed and things like that.
Yeah.
They look like they could be functional somewhere. If it's on the outside of a ship that's fixing something, or if it's in the bowels. So that's what makes them look all so authentic in a way.
Yeah. Do you think that Lucas's aesthetics, like the choice that you were talking before about the fact that it's like a used future in Star Wars and that Space 1999 is this pristine sort of look, do you think that's because of money, or do you think that's because he liked Westerns and serials and wanted to sort of recreate that, or why do you think he went for that aesthetic?
I think no, I just think the whole thing was a little bit visionary. I think he knew what he didn't want. I think that's what's important with Star Wars.
Yeah.
He most definitely didn't want, all of the previous kind of iterations in science fiction, and he wanted something that goes at a lick and a pace as well. He wanted it to look brilliant. He wanted aspects of 2001: A Space Odyssey because of the tech and the fabulousness of it. For Star Wars, to me, there's two moments in the New Hope that absolutely blew me away. It was the skeleton draped across the top of the sand dunes, the dinosaur.
Yeah.
And it was the fact that the Millennium Falcon could just take off from Mos Eisley. And that, to me, took me into this other world. And the fact that every now and again something wouldn't work. And I think, for me, he knew what he didn't want.
Neil, I'm imagining you as like a 7 or 8 year old, ruddy of cheek, your little glasses, perhaps a bit of sellotape on the side, or something, to put that together. And you have obviously clearly, because we've had you on before talking about the Daleks,
Yeah,
and now you're talking about Space 1999, and so
yeah,
you're obviously a massive fan as a kid of this sort of science fiction.
absolutely.
Maybe British
Yeah.
science fiction, would that be too much of a stretch? Or
Well, it's. I always thought that Star Wars was the start of it, but
right,
when I revisited Space 1999, I realised how many memories I had of the series. So I think it was there from Space 1999, but Star Wars was the reason that I got into science fiction or science fantasy in a huge way, and it's the reason why I wanted to get into kind of working in animation and write stories and all those sorts of things. So I think it triggered a whole generation of people like me who wanted to work in those kind of things. So Star Wars was the starting point for sure. But yeah, I've been a geek and a nerd from day one.
But do you remember what it was like to see Star Wars?
Yeah, so I was 7, I think, when I saw it, and I certainly just remember I think it's just an emotion more than anything of just being kind of just awe and excitement of kind of seeing this world and feeling like you weren't watching a film. You were looking in through a window into something that was real. That's what it all felt. Whether it was that used universe thing or those details in the background, like the skeleton on the sand dune, but it felt like a real place that you were looking at.
You said there's a distinction in your head between science fiction and science fantasy. What's the difference?
When I was a child, I don't think there was a distinction, but certainly now I would view Star Wars more as science fantasy versus 2001 is definitely science fiction. So,
Okay.
you think of the main tropes within Star Wars, and it's wizards and mystical magic and pirates, smugglers, that kind of thing. There's a veneer of science fiction, I guess. The visuals are science fiction, but everything from how the spaceships take off to hyperdrive and all of those things are a fantasy. Really, they're not. There's not much kind of fact within them, but there doesn't need to be.
Yeah,
it works, as a whole.
I mean, is there anything either of you would like to add about Space 1999 and this sort of end of one thing, and that we're about to tread a new path, maybe?
But I think it's something that Stephen mentioned at the beginning. I think it is interesting that it's kind of a pre-Star Wars series, and that it was cancelled at the point where probably it would become really popular. Once Star Wars had come out, everything kind of got greenlit as far as science fiction. But it's interesting. Certainly in Britain, the other show that in my childhood was Blake 7, which started in development before Star Wars came out, and there was a point in development where the kind of the effects people went to see it at the cinema and just realized everything they're doing was terrible. And
I love that.
But it transitioned by the fourth series of that show that they were doing a very used universe style within the model building. So that's a show that sort of has a bit of an identity crisis because of the impact of Star Wars versus shows that did come before. That this is probably much more, as you said, influenced by the possibilities of 2001, but Kubrick would have probably hated this show because of the fact it's
because of reasons.
Because of reasons, because of things that we've said. But yeah, I think there's a definite point here, isn't there? There's a tipping point in kind of science fiction history that you're touching on with Star Wars coming out.
I'm very fond of Space 1999. I also found it quite sad as well that it didn't quite do what it meant to do, that it was just slightly out of time, even a month out of time. It just felt like quite sad, and it was just like, the imagination was there, the talent was there, but it just lacked that vision.
But it's a real shame that it didn't get the traction that maybe it deserved. It lived in the minds of people of my age and Stephen's age. Maybe not so much you, Matt, by the sound of it. But
no. So when Star Wars came out, I was only 4 when Star Wars came out. So I don't think
I was 19.
I don't think
I was 7.
Even remember seeing it at the cinema first time round, possibly.
The thing is, there's a huge difference between, I was 7 and you were 4. There's a huge that could be 20 years, couldn't it? Because I feel like by the time you get to 7, you sort of kind of know who you are to a degree, and I feel like I'm just still doing the same things I was doing at 7. I'm still thinking about the same things. I mean, Christ, I'm talking about the same program here, that I saw when I was 6.
Now we Brian the Brain falls into our remit, so I suppose we need to rate Brian.
Oh wow!
Marks, please, for the way that Brian looks.
Well, there's elements within there where, if you look at it, there is elements where you can see some things that end up in things like R2-D2. I'm being slightly generous here.
You have to squint.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot,
you have to have a few whiskeys, squint. But
whiskey squints.
Whiskey squints. He's not brilliant. I would probably think he's like a 4, something like that.
This is out of 5, I would say.
Oh, sorry, out of 5. Oh my goodness. No, he's not a 4 then, is he? He's
probably not.
A 2.
A 2. I mean, I think that's quite generous. But Stephen, what would you give him?
I was going to go with 2 as well, but I know you can lower it.
No, I mean, I'm fine with 2. So what about then fit for purposeness?
Well, this is where it goes up a little bit, I think.
Okay.
I mean, as a personality and as a force to be reckoned with, they kind of managed it quite well in his clumsy way.
I would say personality. There's a lot of character there, but was he fit for purpose, as in the purposes he was in world built for? I would say no, because he killed everybody.
Because he goes mad.
Oh, he goes mad, doesn't he? So he's actually.
On that level,
I would check if I got the receipt.
However, when we looked at Hal, I mean, Hal is sort of maybe be absolved from the psychopath tag, Although, subsequently we find out with Hal that it was maybe due to his interpretation of the logic and all that sort of stuff.
He wasn't given the full information. He wasn't told that the crew didn't know.
But again, I come back to Kubrick himself talking about the fact that if you create something in the image of a human, which Hal is, then you will necessarily transpose the good things and the bad things. And one of those bad things being that sometimes people have nervous breakdowns, and that's what Hal does. So, but what I'm saying is that Hal killed people, and we gave him a 10 because he was sort of like the beginning of something, or he was best in class, I suppose, not just within the universe, but within our world as well.
Well, I'm sure Brian was probably inspired by Hal anyway, but they've obviously gone in a different direction. But Brian doesn't have any redeeming. There's no misinformation. It's literally that his dad is making a slightly better version. So it's it's like if your parents are having got a slightly better brother or sister for you, so you go off and do them in. So I think.
So what are you going to say then? What's your number for fit for purpose?
I would say a 3.
3, okay. Stephen?
Yeah, 3's good. Yeah.
Okay. So let's say he's a 5 out of 10 then, shall we?
Okay.
Yeah, okay. So he is a shit robot.
I think there's no denying that, is there?
Sorry, Bernard.
I mean, we'd give Bernard 10 out of 10, wouldn't we? But
yes,
as a man.
Yeah, as a human being.
I love a bit of Bernard.
None better.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Neil, for coming back and
thanks for having me.
Chatting about great sci-fi stuff. It's lovely to speak to you. We will be back next time for another. It probably will be another non-Star Wars, won't it? Probably until we actually watch Star Wars again. So until then, goodbye.
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 End of transmission.
Oh, come on, folks. Be happy.